Today's lab is lab 29 on polymer models. So what are polymers? These are materials made of long repeating chains of molecules. And these chains, kind of like what we did last week when we talked about these long carbon chains. These chains are big. I mean, they can be hundreds of thousands of atoms in one molecule. They can even be millions of atoms within one molecule. And just some items that are made from polymers, we know plastics for one, and these are some examples, and these are items that we have used in our lab. We have polyethylene, which is just the plastic bags, polypropylene, our beaker, and then our reaction plates are made of polystyrene. But you are also made of polymers. Your nails, your hair, even your DNA is composed of polymers. So these long chains are composed of small units called monomers. And so here we have ethylene, and this one right here is a single unit. This is a monomer of ethylene. And what happens is these two monomers, well actually a whole bunch of monomers, link up together to form a chain. They polymerize. And so what happens is we see here that these two carbons have a double covalent bond. This bond breaks. And we know that carbon has 4 bonds, and so we have 1, 2, 3, and here's a 4th one, and this is the chain's going to continue out this way. And then here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's this covalent bond with the next monomer connecting with its carbon. And again, this one breaks, that double bond breaks, and then the chain continues. And so you can see how these are composed of a bunch of different monomers. And I'll write that down, monomers. Okay? The structure and the arrangement of the atoms influence the properties of the material that it makes up. So last week we learned that in general, when you have these really long polymers, it gives the material that it's made from a higher melting point. It also, the longer the chains, the higher the viscosity. And the reason being is these chains end up having a greater surface area the longer they are. And remember, they kind of tangle up and they start sticking together. And so that's why you get that higher melting point and the higher viscosity. Now, some of these chains, and remember we talked about them being these big carbon chains with these nice, strong covalent bonds in between. And let's say we have another molecule over here also. And so some of these chains have these like these branches that dangle off the chain, and we talked about it being kind of like a charm bracelet. And so they can come down, and they're hanging down here, and what they do is they're exposed to the surrounding more than the atoms that make up the chain. And so these branches, these charms, often determine how the polymer is going to interact with things in its environment. And so sometimes these groups, instead of just hanging loose in the polymer chain, they actually connect and chain together. Kind of think of it like a ladder, you know, like these are forming the rungs of the ladder. And this is called cross-linking. Cross-linking. Okay, and this, as you can imagine, will tend to strengthen the material that it's made of. Makes it harder and makes it difficult, more difficult to melt. All right, so let's look at our experiment. All right, So we're on page 168. And actually, let's go to 170. So we learned that when molecules move, they can stick together, and then that changes the property with how much they stick. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind on how that stickiness or the ease with which it slides tells you what kind of material you're going to have. So the first one, we're going to make these, or I'm going to make these three. So the first one is polyethylene, and notice the abbreviation PE here. This molecule is composed of 2 carbons with the double bond and then the surrounding hydrogen. And then here you can see the structural formula. So this is the monomer. Okay, this is the single unit. And this is a bunch of them connected together. And I made a model here showing, here you have your chain of carbons and your attached hydrogens, and these tubes here showing you that the chain continues. So as you can imagine, we've got these nice strong covalent bonds here making this chain nice and strong. So polyethylene here is made out of this material, okay? So let's pretend this is a chain just like this. We have these 2 hydrogens here. These slide back and forth easily. All right, this gives them kind of this weaker bond. They slide together. There's not much catching happening. And so as you can see, the material is very flexible and really movable. All right, so now let's look at polypropylene monomer. Okay, the monomer is very similar. It has the 2 carbons with a double bond. It has the hydrogens, but what's different here is we have a CH3. Here's the carbon with 3 hydrogens. This is called a methyl group. Okay, and then when you look at the structural formula, when you have a bunch of monomers hooked together, our methyl group is every other carbon. And so I have here this chain. So you can see here, this is the carbon chain, all right? And then here are the methyl groups, and you'll notice it's every other carbon. Here's a methyl group, here's one without, here's a methyl group, here's one without, here's a methyl group. And again, I have the tubes here showing that the chain will continue. So let's see about its stickiness, okay? So again, we're gonna pretend we have 2 of these. And as these methyl groups, like we said, these charms hanging off these branches, they kind of snag and they stick. And what happens here is this causes the product that's being made from this to be stiffer. Okay? So let's look at polypropylene. It is stiffer, right, compared to polyethylene, but you can still see there is some flexibility. I was able to still kind of move the chain, but not as easily as polyethylene. Polypropylene. Okay, so polypropylene with the methyl groups, they stick and give you a firmer product. Our next one we're going to look at is polyvinyl alcohol. It's what you would know of as like Elmer's glue, paste, things along those lines. Again, this monomer is very similar in that it has the 2 carbons with the double bond. It has your hydrogens. But we have a group here that you should be familiar with. This is a hydroxyl group with the oxygen and the hydrogen. And I hope you know what that means from last week. But let's look at where you have a bunch of monomers together. And you'll notice, right, we know that hydroxyl groups are polar, and so that allows us to have hydrogen bonds. And what happens is these come along and they form these hydrogen bonds. You can see here and here you're going to form hydrogen bonds, and this stops the sliding from happening. And as you can imagine, this gives it strength, okay? Kind of a flexibility because these can move, but you get this nice strong product from this. But we also know that when you add a hydroxyl group, it will bond with water, right? And so whenever you have a hydroxyl group on something, it's soluble. So you can dissolve Elmer's glue in water. And we will see that next week. The other thing I want to show you is polystyrene. You're going to have a question that talks about polystyrene. This product is made from polystyrene, and as you can see, it's not flexible. You can't bend it at all. Actually, if I bent it, it would snap. Okay. So again, the polyethylene slides easy, making it flexible. The polypropylene with its methyl groups, they tend to snag, giving you a stiffer product. And then the PVA can have hydrogen bonds because of the hydroxyl groups, making it a nice strong product without sliding. So when you do your labs, you have 4 questions, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that will conclude your lab. Thank you very much.